Welcome to the YAHOWAH blog, brought to you by Wookie, who would like to continue with episode 10 of Mohammed's criminal enterprise. The story we're tracking, isn't it, Wookie, is what happened now 14 centuries ago when Mohammed was desperate. Islam as a religion had died in Kaabaville, which I call Kaabaville as opposed to Mecca because there was no Mecca at the time. It was actually Petra. And Muhammad had been laughed out of town as just a foolish fool. He had done everything imaginable to invalidate his calling. He had accepted the idolatrous indulgence where his family members, the Quraysh, had offered him sex, power, and money if he would just incorporate their gods and goddesses into his religion. And the chief gods and goddesses of the Kaaba did not include Allah or Ar-Rahman. Ar-Rahman was the principal god of Muhammad at the time. The chief gods of the Kaaba were actually girls. I probably didn't know that rocks come in two flavors, masculine and feminine. It was a very binary world back then. And the goddesses were Alat, Manat, and Al-Uzza. And so the Quraysh said, this has been the money train of the Islamic religion here around the Kaaba, with the pilgrimage and the Hajj and the prostration prayer and the like for a better part of a century. So if you accept our gods and goddesses, then, we'll alternate and we'll also accept your God, Ar-Rahman, and we'll just all get along splendidly. And Muhammad agreed to the deal. He wove Alat, Manat, and Al-Uzza into his Quran. Their names are still there if you're curious. And then his father-in-law, that's using the term rather loosely, since Abu Bakr was the man who gave up his 6-year-old daughter when Muhammad was 66 to have sex with her. But he complained, after all that he had sacrificed to earn his spot in the monotheistic religion of Islam, that, well, 4 gods were at least 3 too many. So to keep his plaything, Muhammad agreed that he would cut back down to 1 god, but how to do so when he had already incorporated Manat, Alat, and Al-Uzza into the Quran? Well, his plan was absolutely ingenious. Yep, Muhammad blamed Satan. He said, and it's recorded in the Quran, so there's no denying it, that Satan inspires every one of Allah's messengers. Yes, that all of Allah's messengers speak for Satan. That's what's called the satanic verses. Well, of course, the natural reaction to that was to mock Muhammad all the more. So Muhammad got, really irritated that people didn't believe his religion after such stupidity. So he came up with the perfect scheme. And that scheme was, if you don't like my rendition of the gods and goddesses, the pagan rock pile of the Kaaba, then I'm going to go to the big shots. I'm going to go to the Temple of Temples, the City of Cities. I'm going to bust out of Kaabaville, and I'm going to go to, what was the name of that place? Oh, he couldn't remember the name. But nonetheless, I'm going to go there, and I'm going to meet in the big temple. Oh, what was the name of that temple? Who was the god? Oh, wait a minute. You're telling me it had been destroyed 6 centuries earlier. Oh, well, let's not worry about that. I'm going to go there. How are you going to get there, Muhammad? I'm going to fly a winged ass. Yep. Asses have wings. And I'm going to fly on one, and I'm going to go there, and I'm going to meet with all the Jewish big shots, and I'm going to lead them in a couple of rakas, a little Islamic prayer, and we're going to jump up from Jerusalem up to meet with Allah, since no one has ever met with him before. Of course, he didn't think it through that if you can't meet Allah leaving from the Kaaba, but you can meet with him if you go to Jerusalem and you're on the Temple Mount, maybe there's a problem with your religion. But nonetheless, Muhammad said that he flew a winged ass to the city whose name he didn't know, to meet in the temple that didn't exist, to do Islamic prostration prayers with people who would have known nothing about Islam, and the entire list of whom, well, they had died centuries prior. And wouldn't you know it, as Muhammad tells his story and he goes up to visit the big rock in the sky, he has to pass through hell. Yes, the only way to get to Allah is to go through hell. And he then wants to add a bit of credibility to his story. So Muhammad comes up with a perfect explanation. Do you know that hell is filled with women? Mm-hmm. And all of those women are hanging from meat hooks by their breasts. And so, obviously concerned about that, or at least curious, Muhammad asked the important question: why are these women all here hanging from their breasts with meat hooks? Oh, the answer: they weren't appreciative to the men who had enslaved them. This was his explanation, nonetheless, but he got distracted somewhere in the process, you see, and he saw his adopted son's wife naked in his visit, and decided he had to have her, so he would come back and, well, send him off to raids so that he could steal his son's wife. They call that incest, but for a guy that's already committed pedophilia, what's the big deal? And, well, by that time, he was a multiple rapist. But anyway, it's beside the point. That's not the whole story. Muhammad is told by his sex toy, Aisha, the 6-year-old, that he had sex with when he was 66 years old, if he was indeed born in the year of the elephant, as the Quran suggests. And as a result of all of this, we find that the mighty Mohammed, you can see Wookie is all excited because Wookie's girlfriend, who is Asher, just came home from the vet, and Asher went directly into the pool, and Wookie wanted to say hi. We're sorry to interrupt this program with that, but nonetheless, we were talking about how Muhammad had to go through hell. He saw his adoptive son's wife. He decided, ooh la la, I would like some of that, and he stole her too. So this is the really charming fellow that created Islam. So his 6-year-old wife, as I was saying before we were distracted here, told Muhammad, listen, the story you've just told me is ludicrous. You were here all night. You didn't go anywhere. And if you tell people this story, after all that you have said thus far, they're going to think you're a Looney Tune. That's a slight paraphrase. She didn't use the term Looney Tune. She used a term that was probably more derogatory. In fact, certainly was. And nonetheless, Muhammad went ahead and told the story, and it is based on that story that Al-Aqsa Mosque was built, and the Dome of the Rock exists to commemorate the total idiocy of Muhammad, Islam, the Hadith, and the Quran. Well, at this point, Muhammad was such a laughingstock that there was no one left in Kaabaville that believed him, and so he was not thrown out of Mecca. He was, not Mecca, Petra, Kaabaville. He was laughed out. And on the way out of town, Muhammad went everywhere that he could find anyone that might give him an audience, and said, listen, I'm looking for a place. I'm looking for a place that'll protect me from these pesky family members that are mocking me for making ludicrous claims. And, well, every place he went, they said, yeah, we've heard about your story. No, go away. We want nothing to do with you. So he finally found somebody stupid enough to buy into his deal. He ran into 20 pagans from Yathrib, which was primarily Jewish. About 30,000 Jews lived there at the time. By the time Muhammad was through, the number was 0. And he told them that he had this great scheme and that they could steal all they wanted. They got to keep 80% of what they stole. He got 20%. And if they were to die stealing, that his God would reward them with a brothel and heaven. So, you're good if you live, you're good if you die, even though you'd be bad either way. But there's only one little catch. You see, these pagans from Yathrib said, listen, but the Jews have been really good to us. And they've told us that their Messiah is coming, and if we're not careful, their Messiah is going to hold us accountable. And well, Muhammad said, well, then no problem. I'm that Messiah. Okay, well, then that resolves that. Now that we've got that all cleared away, then what do you need from us? And he says, oh, just a simple pledge. I need you to promise that you'll protect me like you will your women. Oh, and there's that other part called the Pledge of Aqaba. You will pledge to wage war against all humankind. So there we are now. We're up to speed. We're in the first year of Mohammad and his new digs. Well, actually, it's the Jewish digs of Yathrib. He's living in Jewish assisted housing. His people are living on Jewish loans. He is actually filling out his Quran now with Talmud stories he has bought from the Jews. It is just really going along splendidly, except for the fact he can't pay his bills. So what are you going to do if you're a sand pirate and you're the godfather of a criminal enterprise that went belly up in Kabbaville as a religion? Ha, perfect. You're going to find the next caravan you can raid, even if it's operated by your own extended family members. And that's what Muhammad did. He went after his own kin, and he sought to rob a caravan. Unfortunately for him, the caravan got away, but nonetheless, he and his goons managed to kill some 40 merchants, and they abducted some 40 merchants, held them for ransom, and then after coming back to Yathrib, all gloating about their great achievement, because, what's more noble than armed robbery and human trafficking and bludgeoning your own family members. Well, there were some people in Yathrib that said, I'm not so sure that's a really moral thing to do. It's kind of hard to justify a religion on saying that stealing is lawful and good, and that particularly when your God says that he wants you to kill because he thinks killing is preferable to stealing. Oh, but both are good. It's just that he prefers blood over booty. So that brings you up to speed. We're now reviewing the 8th Quran called the Spoils of War that was recited to commemorate the great heist of Badr that turned a failed prophet into a successful profiteer. Quran 8:10, and it was left out that Allah didn't have a fondness for verbs. Not made, well, there's a preposition here that was always left out by. Allahu, he didn't even really know his name. He will call himself Allahu, Allahi, and Allaha, which means the for him, the for her, and the to him. So, and it was not made by Allahu other than good tidings, so that your hearts might be at rest with it. And there is no victory except from Allahi. Indeed, Allahi, Allah, in this case, Almighty, all-wise. 3 verbs were omitted from this single verse and a preposition. But nonetheless, the Quran is the perfect word of the ungod of Islam. And the message here, the great moral message of the Quran, because of course it is a great religion, right? Is that you shouldn't be troubled over this idea that you killed 40 businessmen who were just minding their own business. You shouldn't be bothered that you abducted 40 businessmen and held them for ransom and tormented them while you were there. You shouldn't be bothered by in the least that Muhammad got cold feet and told his Muslim marauders that they could keep 100% of what they stole and then reneged on it and took 100% of what they stole for himself. You ought not be worried that he lied on this occasion. no big deal, because Allah is saying, I'm telling you, that murder and abduction stuff and the line was all good tidings. Yeah, it was the gospel, the good news, so that your hearts would be at rest with it. Because there is no victory except from Allah. He, indeed, Allah, Almighty, all wise. Yes, if he was almighty, all wise, then why is the Quran missing verbs and prepositions? And why, if he is all wise, did he screw everything up such that there isn't a sensible statement, a moral line, anything redeeming or original in the entire book from beginning to end, and that 80+% of it is comprised of two things? Well, maybe three, to be fair. The never-ending argument that everybody that knew Muhammad said he was a complete idiot, a call to war where you are to die killing for Allah, a new form of human sacrifice. Everyone dies. And of course, plagiarized stories that were purchased from the Jews and then twisted. All right, so Allahu, Allahi, and Allah, called all three in this one verse, was sufficiently schizophrenic to say that mass murder and abduction were happy tidings and restful news. And sadistic, he confessed to being responsible and yet thus guilty of these crimes. As for almighty and all wise, not on your life. Lo, verily, Allah was now the Lord of terror and the Rabbi of revenge. It was a promotion of sorts, of course, because in the previous 100 surahs, he had been hell's warden, spending all of his time lording over painful punishments. I suppose even snakes need to get out from time to time, stretch their scales and kill something. However, to get anyone to believe and follow a demented deity, consciences would need to be anesthetized. Quran 8:11. When he covered you with a slumber, anesthetized you, yes, made you zombies as a security from him, an inner calm and reassurance. He caused water rain to descend from the sky to cleanse and purify with you, and to remove from you the rija, the stigma of whispering rumors and innuendos of malfeasance of Shaitan, the adversary, Satan, to strengthen your hearts and make your feet firm with it. That's oh my. This is a snake acting like one. So he's saying he made you dumb as a stone so that you would share something with your God. And that was an inner security to make you stupid because, well, as the last surah of the Quran reveals, as they were handed down chronologically, any Muslim that questions the Quran will cease to be a Muslim. So he had to dumb you down, Muslims. So it's a security measure. Otherwise, there would be no Muslims going forward. And then he caused water to descend from the sky. Can you imagine that? Wow. There was the miracles of miracles. There was rain. And Allah, man, he knows how to prove his existence. Perfect at it. And the rain was to cleanse and purify with it because, well, you were all covered with blood and all. And that would kind of make you look, well, guilty of having murdered people. So we're going to wash that off because, well, it's a stigma. And there were whispering rumors all around that, well, this goddamn religion was satanic, had to be satanic because, well, the first practitioners of it, Mohammad and the first Muslim were acting like demonic demons. So that was the whispers that, well, Allah needed to resolve because, you see, Allah has an identity problem. And you see, this little problem is that Allah is Hasatan. Hasatan means the adversary. He's the snake that slithered out of the garden. You may have heard his story before. Well, Allah doesn't want to be the adversary. Allah, Hasatan, the adversary, wants to be God. And it's impossible to get anyone to believe you're a God when your title is the adversary. So, how do you solve that? Now, what you do is you fill your religious texts like the New Testament and also in the Quran with all sorts of statements that purport to have you as the wannabe God denouncing the title that you're trying to disown of the adversary. So in this case, Allah was just getting warmed up. In this passage, Satan has morals. You see, it is Satan that was trying to strengthen the hearts. And he was the one that was, more importantly, trying to reinforce the fact that killing isn't good. So Satan is the one with morals. And by the way, that permeates the Quran almost every time that Satan is presented. He's the one that is trying to work some sense into the Muslim mindset. But Allah will have none of that, of course. Now, Satan is the one, of course, who is trying to wash away the stigma of thievery and murder. Apart from Islam, Arabs recognize that killing family and friends and stealing from them, well, was wrong. Therefore, an altered sense of awareness was proposed to assuage their souls, although I don't think even today there are 3 Muslims on the planet that would know what assuage means. And therefore, the rain, although Allah didn't know the word for rain, so it was just water from the sky, eliminated the blood stains, scrubbing the scene of the crime. Then this Quran recital served to assure these marauding murderers that they were on the right side of their new religious order. It was dastardly, of course, and demonic to have a wannabe God sponsor a killing spree and then to accuse those who opposed it on moral grounds of being in league with Satan. But how are Muslims supposed to believe Allah is God when he admittedly is less moral than his satanic alter ego? The consciences of the last ethical Muslims were denounced by accusing them of being satanic whispers. It's just like Paul in Christianity. He admitted he was demon possessed in his last letter to the Corinthians in the last chapter, but then he accuses anyone who criticizes him of being satanic. It's the perfect answer. And of course, that's the same approach the Quran takes. And because the faithful are typically irrational, it works beautifully. So the consciences of the last ethical Muslims were denounced while accusing them of being satanic. It was the same ploy that we see played out by anyone who delegitimizes most religions. Satan's sentence was being cast out of heaven and the garden and reduced from a malak. He was actually a karub. A karub is the form of spiritual messengers like malak who are put on guard duty. And he was on guard duty on the walls of Eden, and he was reduced to a serpent for the very crime he is now committing, effectively killing Adam and Chawah. There was no Eve. Chawah is her name. It means speaks her mind, by misappropriating and misconstruing Yahweh's testimony. The snake's cure was to bring mankind down to his level. His revenge against Yahweh for imposing this sentence on him based upon Yahweh's love of mankind and wanting to lift man up to enjoy an eternal relationship with us and make us part of his extended family. Satan's solution is to kill all humankind. That's why the Quran says that there are only 2 kinds of Muslims: those who have honored their vow to die killing for Allah, and those who are waiting for the opportunity to die killing for Allah. That means that should Allah get his way as it's presented in the Quran, humanity ceases to exist. Now, for your information, one of the reasons I have transliterated the Arabic basis for angel is that its meaning is derived from the Hebrew. And while it's routinely rendered as angel in the Quran, in these translations, that is inaccurate. Malak describes a spiritual messenger, a envoy or implement. By contrast, angel is a transliteration of the Greek word agelos, meaning message or messenger. One cannot rationally translate Hebrew terms incorporated into the Quranic text, and the entire Arabic of the Quran is bastardized Hebrew. And it's bastardized Hebrew largely because, well, for two reasons. One, there was no written Arabic at the time. And number two, the majority of the Quran is bastardized and twisted Talmud stories that Mohammad purchased from rabbis. That with these Hebrew terms that are incorporated into the Quranic text, many of them now are transliterated by way of Greek terminology without misleading the reader, because the basis of the terms are not shared. That is one of the reasons that I do a very literal translation of the Quran all the way through goddamn religion. To the uninformed, angels are good and godly, but as I've mentioned, Satan was a cherub, and as a cherub, he was a malak, and therefore, as a malak, he is a spiritual being. And since there are no angels, he was actually a demon. As spiritual implements, they can be a force for good or evil, depending upon who is directing them. In this case, the Malakati were reinforcing the resolve of terrorists, while the chief Malak was terrorizing the disbelievers. And what the Lord of Terror was orchestrating was mutilation and decapitation, the very things Islamic jihadists did to defenseless Jewish women and children in Israel. Slicing off a person's fingers and toes, all of them one at a time, prior to cutting off their head, is designed to inflict maximum agony, while demonstrating that the sadist not only enjoys inflicting pain, but that there's nothing their victim can do to stop it. A hadith says, this is from Ishaq 3:21, Allah sent down water from the sky at night, and it prevented the polytheists from getting to the wall or to the well before us. This tradition is followed by a hellish one, suggesting that the source of inclement weather was satanic. Now, the fact of the matter is, on prior shows, I have read every account of what occurred at Badar. And in those accounts, there was no mention of anyone trying to get to a well. And if that were the purpose, that they could not get to the well, that, by the way, the Muslims said as a matter of strategy, they were all going to destroy. Nothing says I'm a good and solid citizen, like living in the desert and plugging up all the wells, but nonetheless, that was their strategy. But if you were to try to thwart someone's desire to get a drink, would you do it with rain? I mean, could there be a dumber way to thwart somebody's quest to get a drink than causing it to rain, where you could open your mouth and get a drink? Nevertheless, let's continue. This is from Ishaq 3:22. I will cast terror into the hearts of those who reject me. So strike off their heads and cut off their fingers, all who oppose me, and my prophet shall be punished severely. You know, it's just stunning to me. that there are 2 billion Muslims that believe that Mohammed was a prophet and that Allah was a God. When the oldest accounts say things like, I will cast terror into the hearts of those who reject me. So strike off their heads and cut off their fingers. All who oppose me and my prophet will be punished severely. It's even more befuddling that there are some 1 billion, as I call them, regressive, because they're not progressive, libertards, because, well, they're stupid, who run cover for and actually promote the madness of this murderous religion and think it's somehow enlightened and good. It is the barometer which tells us how far humanity has fallen. That not only would there be a world tormented by Islamic terrorism and threatened by Islamic jihadists, and never bother to read any of these books that actually describe the nature of Islam and oppose it based upon its own scriptures. But to those who have recently been indoctrinated in America's and European colleges and have been misled through their progressive educational systems, are actually proud to be protesting on behalf of Islam and Hamas and Hezbollah for the myth of Palestinians, on behalf of perpetrating genocide against Jews, and at the same time demonizing the victims of this sadistic religion. There is no denying that this statement is sadistic. But it's from the Sarah. What about the Quran? Certainly the Quran wouldn't say that its God wants to cast terror into the hearts of those who reject him, right? Clearly, Allah couldn't be a terrorist, right? And if Allah was a terrorist, then Islam would be a terrorist religion. So it couldn't be true, right? Oh, well, what does Quran 8:12 say? They wanted to begin with remember, but, well, Allah couldn't remember to include the word remember. So those who have helped him out with his Quran have put in a parenthetical remember. When you're Rabuka is Lord in this story because, well, Muhammad was stupid. Well, that's just the only way to explain it. And he didn't really have a God, nor did he have any inspiration. So he actually bought Quran stories from the rabbis in Yathrib. And as rabbis and full of themselves, they told him that the title for Lord was Rabbi. So Muhammad went with it. So your rabbi would be Rabuka. My rabbi would be, my Lord would be Rabbi. So anyway, remember when your Rabuka, your Lord, inspired al-Malakati, well, it's rendered as the angels, but you know better now. I am with you, so keep firm those who believed. I will cast al-Ruba, terror, into the hearts of those who disbelieved. Surely it doesn't go any farther, right? I mean, for the Islamic God to say that he's a terrorist would make Islam incompatible with civilization, wouldn't it? There's really no way to get around that. If the Quran says, I will cast Ruba, terror, into the hearts of those who have disbelieved, anyone who hasn't capitulated to Islam, then he would be a terrorist. And if Allah is a terrorist, well, he can't be a God. And if the Quran attributes terrorism to its wannabe God, then it is incompatible with life. But it didn't end there. So strike them over the necks and smite over all their fingers and toes. To smite is to strike, to cut off, and they were wielding swords. So strike them over the necks and smite over all their fingers and toes. Quran 8:12. So Allah is worse than a terrorist. He's a sadistic psychopath. He's the great, not only manipulator, but the man who would be, or the God who would be the great the God who would think that it is appropriate to torture little women and little children, who would mutilate them. He's the God of the Lord of mutilation. There's no way to deny this. It's written in the Quran. Allah is the wannabe God of mutilation. Allah is the wannabe God of terrorism. If you think that terror is good and that decapitating people, strike them on their necks, and mutilating them, torturing them by striking off their fingers and toes is a good thing, then maybe you're a Muslim. Or maybe you're a progressive and you're just immoral and ignorant. Either way, I'm opposed to you, as should be every moral, compassionate, and courageous person on earth. It is not Islamophobic to expose and condemn Islam based upon the Islamic scriptures in the Quran. It is moral, it is intelligent, it is informed, it is compassionate, it is wise. Islam is a plague. When Angela Merkel lied to the German people, to all of Europe, and then in a speech before the U.S. Congress, and said that anyone who presents Islam other than a peaceful religion is an Islamophobe and is ignorant, she lied deliberately, knowingly. And as a consequence, she destroyed Europe. She brought the plague of Islam in such that there is no hope now for Europe. The Muslims in Europe are motivated by these words. They think these words came from God. Cut off their heads, cut off their fingers and toes, cast terror. All about you. You can't have people who believe such things living in your midst. That's to say that they cannot be good Muslims. They cannot follow the Quran. They cannot be Islamic without being committed to kill you and to torture you in the process, to be savages, to be terrorists. There's no other way to interpret these words. That's what they say. Stop making excuses for the religion. Stop pretending that the problem is Hamas, or that Hamas has corrupted their religion, or that there's such thing as a radical Islam or an extremist. The truth is revealed in Quran 8:12. Remember. Okay, so he forgot the word remember. When your Lord inspired the al-malakate, the pretend angels, I am with you. So keep firm those who believed. I will cast terror, ruba, into the hearts of those who have disbelieved. So strike them over their necks, which means to cut off their heads, and smite them over their fingers and toes, mutilate them. Why doesn't everyone in the world know this? Why must leaders of the world feigned ignorance of Islam? Why are there a billion regressive libertards screaming on behalf of the genocidal ambitions of this death cult? Why wasn't Israel capable of holding the Muslims that did this to them accountable? Why did they go off and strike at Hamas when it was Islam that motivated the crime? Do they not care that their children's toes and fingers were cut off in the presence of their parents, and that they were burned alive, that their children were raped, and then their breasts were cut off to be balls that these idiots could play with? And they don't have the dignity to hold the perpetrators accountable? And so they went off and lashed out at Hamas, as opposed to acknowledging that this is Islam, right from the Quran. Something seriously wrong with that. Grossly immoral, cowardly, Israel. In Israel, you have a real serious credibility problem here. You've been hunted and attacked and brutalized by Muslims for 14 centuries, and you still can't say it? Yes, I know that this particular attack wasn't against Muslims. It's like the HTS Muslims that are really ISIS Muslims that are killing Alawite Muslims in Syria, and now trying to do so in Lebanon. This was Muslims killing their own kin. But they would return and perpetrate genocide against the Jews in Yathrib. And then the few Jews that escaped, they would attack them again, and the farming community that they migrated to Kabar. I'm sorry, this is really hard on me because I care deeply about Israel. And I'm so sad that Israel is incapable of acknowledging the nature of the enemy that's mutilating, terrorizing, and killing them. And they have zero chance of prevailing under that basis. I'm also sad for Israel, of course, that they've erased the name of their God and that they told him to shut up and go away. It's hard to be committed to something, and I've been committed to this now for 24 years, all my waking hours, and sometimes speaking to Israel is like speaking to the wall that they bob their head against below the Temple Mount that is scarred with Islamic trophies. Allah is not only equating himself with terrorism, he's promoting torture by smiting fingers and toes. That makes the Islamic God a sadist. And a God who is a sadist is satanic. It's as simple as that. Allah is Satan. He confessed. Don't blame me. I'm just pointing out the obvious. Under the heading of ideology, obedience, approval, the New York Times, Daniel Goleman wrote this in a 1985 article, The Torturer's Mind. According to the experts, the preconditions that can lead someone to become a torturer include a fervently held ideology that attributes great evil to some other group and defines the believer as a guardian of the social good, an attitude of unquestioning obedience to authority, and the open or tacit support of the torturer by his peers. More Immediately, the torture seems to cope with his cruelty by means of a psychological split in his personality. It appears that Allah, Muhammad, and the first Muslims are textbook cases of what is required to torture others. And if I may, it's not just that the Muslims attacked and tortured, mutilated their own family members at Badr, First Blood. It's not that they returned to Yathrib and perpetrated genocide on Muslims, on Jews, cutting off their heads, slaving the children, raping the women, and that they would do so again at Kabar, being even more sadistic there. It's not just that they held out and perpetrated the war of capitulation, forcing all Arabs to surrender to Islam or die. It's not just that in the first 100 years of Islam, that Muslims murdered 1/3 of the planet's population, killing upwards of 200 million people and enslaving 200 million more. It's that they're still doing it. The New York Times would go on to report that the fundamental psychological underpin of the torturer is in dividing the world into two groups, us and them. They form a closely knit clique with a special language for the devices and techniques of torture. They have a nickname that they use among themselves and speak of those not in their group as being different, inferior, and deserving of their abuse. He's speaking, of course, of Islam. Devaluing and scapegoating members of another group allows the perpetrator to feel more important and worthy. Germans, for example, felt superior to Jews by presenting others as subhuman and evil. Their persecution was justified. The victims have brought this fate upon themselves, which it says throughout the Quran. And the more the victim suffers, the more the torturer feels that their abuse validates their fervently held beliefs that cruelty is justified. So I should note that every reference to Allah in the Quran, where Allah is depicted in a location, he is always in hell, engaged in perpetual torture. The environment that enables the torturer to do his job is one of outright or tacit approval, or at least silence. In the absence of voices that raise questions or implant doubt, a torturer can operate with a sense that those around him approve. Voices of protest can thus be one means to break down the atmosphere that breeds torture. End quote. I have been trying to tell the world that they need to stop using bullets and bombs to attack a symptom of Islam, like going after Hezbollah and Hamas. The only way to stop the torture that is the terror and genocide, even apartheid, of Islam is to break the silence, to be that voice of protest that explains the actual content of the Quran and Hadith, the actual depravity of Allah, Muhammad, and the first Muslims. That is the only answer. It's why I do these programs. It's why I spend so much time on X and on Facebook trying to get the attention of God's people, because this is the only solution. And who would have thought? We find the affirmation of it in a New York Times article, although this was written, 40 years ago, before the New York Times became a liberal rag. They wouldn't know morality if it hit them between the eyes. Nonetheless, that was then, and they may have been wiser back then. And it is exactly what we're witnessing with the Islamic God silencing dissent while ordering the faithful to decapitate and mutilate men so that their fathers, their sons, and their brothers might rob them. Islam has sunk to a new low, but it would only get worse. And alas, the most deplorable behavior by the most despicable of men was justified because they opposed Allah and his Rasul. And for declaring the truth about Muslims mutilating family members, they would be set on fire. Sounds like October 7th. And that the Muslims were listening and trying to comply. Quran 8:13. That, they're missing the verb is, because they opposed Allah and his Rasul. And whoever opposes Allah and his Rasul, then lo, Allah, missing the verb is, severe in penalty and punishment. Quran 8:14. That, so taste it. And that for the disbelieving infidels, missing the verb, is the punishment, missing the preposition, of fire. It's hard to know what to say. I guess my first thought is to say that those who are antagonizing Muslims by burning the Quran are idiots. Read the damn thing. Read 8:13. Tell people what it says. You want to make it difficult for Muslims to act like Muslims? Then expose the Quran and tell people what it actually says. That Allah's sadistic. That Allah is into torture. That Allah gets his jollies by burning people alive. And rather than just doing that, Allah's so despicable, he says, so taste it. Well, Allah, again, is admitting that he is a sadist. The Islamic God reinforces his demonic nature by claiming throughout the Quran that he is responsible for shackling disbelievers in hell so that he can torment them at his pleasure. This is what God would be like if God were Satan. But this satanic deity is the God of Islam. If you like your gods to be demonic, if you like your gods to be sadist, if you prefer your God to be satanic, Allah's your guy. Well, Allah's command to fight is new, as is his bribe of booty. His character hasn't changed. In the next segment of Scriptures from Hell, we find Allah ordering Muslims to continually pursue the infidels. By the way, these infidels, they were Muhammad's extended family members. Quran 8:15. Oh, you who believe, when you meet those kafar, it's always rendered as disbelievers or infidels. But see, I don't think Muslims ever thought that somebody who has a passion for translating the Hebrew of the Torah and prophets would ever dare take the time to study Allah's diatribe. Because kafar doesn't mean disbelievers, doesn't mean infidels. It's rendered that way because that is the implication that Muslims want to confer, but that's not the word that Allah chose. Kafar speaks of those who are reconciled. It is one of the most important verbs in Hebrew, speaking of those who are purged of their guilt. They are the ones who benefit from the Kaporeth, which would be the mercy seat of the Ark of the Covenant. They are the ones who will meet with the returning King and Messiah and God, Yahweh, on the day of Yom Kippurim, that is based upon the same verb. And so the enemy of Islam is those who are set apart unto Yahweh, who are kafar, who are purified of their guilt, who are redeemed and reconciled back into the covenant relationship. That's what kafar actually means. Oh, you who believe, Muslims, when you meet those who are kafar, advancing. By the way, the businessmen, the merchants, were not advancing. When they saw the Muslims, they fled. They turned their backs and tried to run. But Allah was trying to make a bigger point here. It wasn't anymore about what happened at Badr. That was sickening. But no, he wants Muslims to go attack the world. And he knew that as they attack the world, not everybody's going to turn tail and run. So when you see the kafar advancing, then he forgot the word do. Verbs are so inconvenient, you know. Not turn the backs to them. Quran 8:16. And whoever turns his back to them on such a day, unless it is a stratagem of war, or to retreat to a troop, he forgot of his own, has indeed incurred the wrath of Allah, and his abode, he forgot the verb, will be hell, the worst and most wretched destination. If hell is the worst and most wretched destination, why is Allah always depicted there? Unless he is the most wretched and worst of wannabe gods. What Allah is reinforcing is something that we saw in the 33rd surah when it was brought up earlier in a reference to the battle of I hate the term Battle of Badr because it wasn't a battle, it was a terrorist raid. And what he said is that, all Muslims fall into two categories. They have either fulfilled their oath and have died killing non-Muslims for Allah, or they're waiting their opportunity to die killing for Allah. And so this is the being reinforced here. Allah hates humankind. Allah's quest is for everyone to die. And so if you're a Muslim, it does not matter the odds that you're up against. It doesn't matter if you're facing certain death. Allah doesn't care if you die. You are to always run headlong into the object and kill them. And if you are a Muslim and you get second thoughts or misgivings and think that, you can't win this battle, as has been the case really of every battle that Muslims have fought in the last 100 years, then you cease to be a Muslim, because then you're showing the signs of restraint and peace, and you're indicating that you don't want to die for Allah. And at that point, you cease to be a Muslim. At that point, you have earned your God's wrath. And if you were a Muslim that went off to war and then decided you really didn't want to die in that war, killing others in that war for Allah, then your God is going to burn your britches forever in the most wretched destinations in hell. So you can't be a peaceful Muslim. You can't be a moderate Muslim. You can't be a Muslim and not want to die killing others. So this whole myth of a moderate Islam, a moderate Muslim, a peaceful Muslim, according to the Quran, they don't exist because Allah's wrath is upon them. And Allah promises that those Muslims who show any sign of valuing their lives are going to be tortured in hell. The kuffar are to be pursued. They're to be mutilated. They are to be decapitated. It is Allah's uncompromising and unrelenting directive. And should a Muslim prefer negotiation, accommodation, or peace, the wannabe God of Islam not only hates these moderate apostates, his intent is to torture them in hell. So, should you encounter a Muslim who pretends to be moderate and peace-loving, they would be well advised to consider this surah. They're either ignorant of what it says and do not know Islam very well, or they're being duplicitous in their interactions. The message was clear. Wield a sword over the necks of non-Muslims or incur the wrath of Allah and roast in hell. There would be no retreat from the Quranic order and Allah's command to die killing. I assume that many of you who are listening to this are rational. I assume that most of you who are listening to this are still capable of knowing that killing is bad. Torture is worse. And that a religion that commands all of its adherents to die killing and torturing shouldn't be allowed. So why do so few stand up? Why do so few seem to know the truth, care to tell the truth? Why are there so many indoctrinated liberals out there parading on behalf of this demonic and sadistic killing machine? I had one of the most liberal men that I've ever known write me because I was talking about how regressive libertards are fanning the flames of Islamic terrorism, and that they are responsible for not only accommodating Islamic terror, but sponsoring it. And he was angry at me for name calling. You can't help people sometimes. And I would tell you that that's the great danger of the world today. The religious are impervious to evidence and reason, and the politically indoctrinated can't process anything morally or rational anymore. All they have is their political platitudes. And so between them, it's a pretty small window of opportunity to reach people and to make a difference. And at this point, we basically have two wars that are both growing in intensity, and both of which independently would cause World War III. At one time, I had wondered which is going to be the principal catalyst, or are they just going to merge and simultaneously engulf the world in war? Of course, the first is this insane proposition of fighting a proxy war against Russia and supplying all manner of killing machines, and then blaming Russia for doing so, and threatening to do everything you can to extend the war against a nation that has the most nuclear weapons, such that if you actually won the war that you are perpetrating, and by the way, NATO is losing it, that the only resort of that nation would be to respond with nuclear weapons, and it would be the end of the world. But you're not smart enough to think it through. The other war, of course, is the Islamic war against all humankind that is being now fought in the streets of Europe and the college campuses of America and in the killing fields of Syria and Iraq and Iran and Israel, as Muslims try to follow Allah's orders, die killing for their wannabe God. I can't tell you which one of these will emerge more quickly, but I can tell you that the prophets wrote vociferously of the flood of Al-Aqsa and its phase 2, which will occur within the next 3 years and will be 1,000 times worse than phase 1. The flood of Al-Aqsa was perpetrated by Muslims, bringing 3,000 jihadists on motor, scooter, and foot into Israel. And they killed 1,300 Jews, tortured and tormented about 3 times that number, and abducted 250. And the IDF, for all of its prowess in beating an army with airplanes and tanks, proved paralyzed. And if you look at the weapons that they're buying, the IDF is no more equipped to fight the next wave of jihadists than they were the last. And Muslims learned that while they cannot beat Israel with fighter jets and with tanks, they can destroy Israel with a flood of jihadists. And the next one is next attack, which will occur within the next 3 years, actually closer to 2. Will be from all around and even from inside, because Israel will be compelled to give up its heartland to appease Saudi Arabia on behalf of America as America isolates itself from the world. And under those circumstances, the IDF will have no response. There's no front lines. There's no ability to use tanks or helicopters or missiles or David's sling or the Iron Dome or its submarines, its fighter aircraft. They're all moot. And this time it's not going to be 1,000 or so Jews who are killed. Hundreds of thousands, perhaps millions. That's what's going to happen. And it's going to happen because, as hard as I'm trying, I am a lone voice out there sharing the truth about Islam, reading from its Quran and Hadith, telling the world that Islam is a death cult, that the only solution is to fight it with words, not bombs, and that it must be quarantined. There are those who are crying out loud that why doesn't the world respond to the Islamic State terrorists murdering upwards of 10,000 Alawite Muslims in Syria? Well, the answer is every time that the West has intervened in an Islamic country to do anything, it's made a bad situation worse, and that would be the same situation here. You can't resolve Islam. Can't be negotiated with, can't be appeased, can't be made democratic, can't be fixed. And so the only choice is to expose it, to condemn it, and to isolate it. If we stopped buying their oil and selling them weapons, they would kill one another, and that would be a shame, but it's a lot better than them killing others. So that's where we are. And I think this might be a good place for us to conclude this program because, quite frankly, I'm sick of Allah the Quran, Muhammad, Muslims, and Islam. I know them all too well. This is a demonic death cult, and they have confessed to that crime openly, blatantly, without equivocation. So I thank you for listening. I know this is tough medicine, but your life depends on it. So this has been the 10th episode of Mohammed's Criminal Enterprise. We still have a lot more Quran to cover, and we'll be back with another program once I finish vomiting and regain my composure. Thank you for listening. I am Craig Winn.